gracias. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this talk. Thanks to the organizer to invite me. That's a great privilege to be there and present some of my activities. So, as you see from the title, I will be giving now a talk about an historical perspective of the different actions on the field that we call the field experiments for trying to detect UFOs and providing evidence which is necessary for the scientific community to make them believe there's something anomalous there. So I will cover both sides of the areas, the civilian sides and the military sides of the different actions. I will start from after the Second World War, from 1947, and we try to go until now. Of course, it won't be a complete story, but still we will have a look at the main events which happen. And doing this, we'll describe who has done what was the strategy employed to try to detect these UFOs, what tactic, in a sense, what kind of instrumentation, for what reason they were used, and what were the results obtained. And at the end, I will conclude in the last part with some personal remarks and conclusions about lessons learned. So I hope you will find this presentation interesting, especially for the persons who don't know the rich history of the ufology. But let me say it's a pity that Roberto is not there, because I put this slide for him, and it's a nice transition from his presentation, because I would like to quote Confucius, who is still one of the main thinkers of Chinese history, and who said that study the past if you would define the future, meaning in an elegant way that knowing and understanding history will help you to provide the future, provide understanding of the future, and even make you understand better the present time. So I think this is very relevant in ufological studies, and especially at the current time with the Navy announcements and activities from the US side. And also a point is we have a lot of documents and informations, lessons learned that have been accumulated since 60 years by many associations or individuals, and we should not reinvent the wheel and benefit from the experience gain. So this is the purpose of this presentation, and I'm looking forward to see the last speaker, Avi Loeb, to know with the Project Galileo if anything related to my topic will be taken into consideration in his approach for detecting UAP or UFOs. Yep. So I'm going to start from the 40s, at the end of the Second War, and of course across the Atlantic, because this is where the controversy started appearing. So no historical record should avoid to talk about Kenneth Arnold, because in June 47 he noticed flying. He was a pilot. He flew above Mont Rainier in Washington state in America, and he noticed some objects flying a very tremendous speed, and that were flying like when you send stones in the water, going up and down. This is the way that the flying saucers expression was born. But in fact, the shape of the object was not a flying saucer at all. So from June onwards, all the summer in 1947 was full of sightings, which of course created a great controversy in America and among the intelligence and military areas. The first attempt to try to detect and take a picture of these flying saucers were from the military, which in the summer they started dispatching some military planes equipped with cameras and trying to get a picture of them. But they didn't manage to get any photos, and this didn't last long. But this is the first official effort to try to collect data. I'm sorry in advance for the people a little bit far, because you won't be able to read some pictures that I will show, but anyway, I will read the most important point written on the board. the main point I wanted to pass is all the information is official and extracted from official documents. The same. So now, at the point that you have to realize after the Second World War, and in particular the launch of the atomic bomb, there was a very big concern because already in 1949, most of the agencies realized that there were a lot of sightings of anomalous phenomena near the very strategic and very restricted areas. And we talk about the end of the 40s. So for example, around Los Alamos National Laboratory, where the atomic bomb was designed, in fact, then you had the Sandia bases where the atomic bombs that were created were stored. You had the Kirtland Air Force Base where these bombs were going to be dispatched to the B-29 planes for protection of security of America and the world. And you had the Manzano Mountain as well, where there were a storage place. And then you had two other places. You see this is where the atomic bomb, first Trinity test of atomic bomb was tried. And then you had two other areas, the White Sands test range, Holloman Air Force bases, where they were testing new rockets and new atmospheric balloon, where also there were some sightings that we see later. And of course, you can notice that Roswell town is on the side here, and we all know something happened there. And also the Socorro place as well, where there's a famous UFO sighting. Now, there was not the only place where there were problems with UFOs, because another place in Texas was plagued as well by sightings of UFOs. And this is an area where they were storing as well the bombs. And they, in the blue book files, they said that they wanted to have to define a precise, comprehensive observers network. They said the military have to stay there and try to see what's happening. So they did that and they organized, and in fact they had observations on 3 nights already in May 1949 by observers, not civilians, but of the 4th Army. So the point is that they realized there was something, an unknown phenomena in what is called the Camp Hood, and they stressed the fact that they needed instrumentation to get to the bottom of the story to realize what was happening. So, of course, after the Second World War, there was a very big concern about the USSR and the fact that maybe they had created a new plane with propulsion by atomic energy, and they could reach the America. So, in fact, early, in October 1949, near the Mount Palomar Observatory, there had been a sighting, a guy working in the observatory, and at the same time the Navy was doing some research into cosmic radiation, and they had some instrumentation. And the guy observed a flight of UFOs, came back to the laboratory to find out there were some readings corresponding to the time when he had observed the UFOs. So the agency started thinking maybe there's a link between radiation and UFOs. So that gave the idea to the first civilians field experiment, whereby a group of people working on the Los Alamos National Laboratory decided to go during the weekend with some instrumentation and try to detect UFOs. So that was the first UFO detection station. So they had a series of Geiger tubes in a little hut, and which were recording the anomalies, and then every week they were getting the data. But of course, at the time there was no internet and there was not much information going around, so they had to try to find UFO sightings from civilians in order to correlate the detection. And they could only do that looking at the newspapers. So it was a very rudimentary way of detecting UFOs and making correlation. And of course, since then, the situation has changed. Now, 2 years later, the same situation prevailed, in a sense that the military were even more concerned, to the point they decided to launch a special program of observation near the 2 bases I mentioned before, Holloman Air Force Base and Vaughn. So what they did is they had designed a program where they had optical instruments, and mainly the Ascania phototheodolite that you see in a picture, that normally are used for following the rockets in the sky. And the advantage is when you take pictures, at the same time you can find details about the altitude, the azimuth, and the elevation. And they thought if we use two, there were many such instrumentation, they could do a triangulation of an object if it was detected and find out more details. So they did that, and there was a report issued in November 1951, and they said that there were a problem with grating cameras, and electromagnetic instrumentation were not set up because they had no money at the time. I think it was the Korean War was starting. So, but in this report, it's very important to notice that they recognize that they had detected aerial phenomena during a launch of an aircraft missile and a V2 launch. There was a film taken, but no triangulation. Of course, the film has never been made available. And in fact, in July 50 and a little bit later, we have learned more information about that, is they had two detections, and the point was there, they said, it has been reported that objects are sighted in some number, and as many as 8 at the single time had been reported. So if we start thinking the Russian coming to America with 8 vehicles above the secret bases, it doesn't make any sense. So that was very strange, and they take pictures as well, but we don't have the pictures. So they said they have no conclusion as to the identity of the objects, not phenomena, but objects, some physical. But they said, they recognize, it does establish the fact that some type of object did exist already in 1951. So I think the US report from last year is 60 years later. They knew already what was going on. So, and in fact, in 1952, through the Freedom of Information Act, there was a very important document released where it's stated that they recognized that there were many sightings of UFO near sensitive major US defense installation, and they recognize the fact they are not natural phenomena and they are not non-aerial vehicles. So we know already since 1952 there are strange things flying in our atmosphere. And they pushed for immediate research and development. So first thing what they did is they wanted to equip some air towers and certain selected radar sites across America with these cameras, video and cameras. They had designed some special cameras where you could, beside the optical picture, analyze the light through a spectrograph of the phenomena taken. And like the astronomers who study the stars far distance through the spectra, they hoped to have a spectra of UFO to know exactly what it was made of. Of course, the camera were very cheap camera, and they didn't result in any concrete result, and moreover, they were not technically sound. This is confirmed in the CIA report from 1953, where, moreover, they mention that they thought this action from the US Air Force was more a public reaction related to the concern of the citizens rather than a pure research program. So this didn't bring any data at all and was quickly quit. Now, concerning instrumentation, should recognize in the project Blue Book, there's mention of one event where there was an area in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where in 1967 there were a lot of sightings. So what they decided to do, and it was not a military, a civilian professor, he used at the time one of the first all-sky camera, and you see the size of it now, and nowadays it would be the size of a hand. So evolution is much more advanced. So they placed it on the roof of an hospital, and they let it running, taking pictures all the time, and they did that for a certain number of days. So they looked at all the pictures and didn't find anything special on them, to the point that, and this was not correct according to me, they mentioned in the Conan report the expectation to place a trained, equipped investigator on the scene of UFO sighting has almost a nil probability. And we are going to see in the next slides that it is not correct. So this is the first introduction about field studies and the context of the Cold War, what was happening. So about field studies, why are you doing field studies? So there are different elements. Contrary to the observer who has only his eyes to see in optical domain, you need to supplement the eyes is not, and the brain of the witness can be persuaded by many things. So it's not reliable enough and won't allow to provide the clues about how UFO work or what is behind them. So the idea is if you put instrumentation in different places, you will have a wider geographical coverage because the camera system, all sky camera, will cover a wider range and you don't need as many observers. You will detect simultaneously throughout different wavelengths of the system different information. And then you have more systematic detection in a sense you can do night and day all the time. And you don't need to have an observer on the field eating, sleeping, and waking up. So this is the reason. Once this, you have to decide on two aspects, the strategy and the tactic. The strategy, how you're going to do, where you're going to place the instrumentation, why, and we'll see some of the tactics later on, strategies, and tactic, what kind of instrumentation you can do. Because of course, you cannot have, because of funding concerns and resources, you cannot have all kind of instrumentation available and running. It's getting very complicated for the normal citizens since the scientific community didn't engage into the topic and the military kept for themselves any data. So let's see now a few more. So in fact, one thing to notice is the same day that Kenneth Arnold observed the disk, there was a prospector in the same area who observed other UFOs, and he observed them with a telescope, and he said that at the same time he observed them, the compass of his telescope fluctuated. So the idea that UFOs were using magnetic propulsion was born, let's say, to the point that a few years later in Canada, there was an engineer for the Canadian Department of Transport who got the idea to set up some instrumentation, and he had this small building, and he had expensive complex electronic equipment throughout different, like a magnetometer for detecting magnetic changes, or gravimeter to detect the change of the gravitation, and then he built this little hut. It was non-man, it was automatic, but if something would have been registered, then there would be an alarm bell into another building, a little bit further. So this was his efforts, and he lasted not so long because little bit 1 year later, then they stopped. In 1954, the Canadian Department of Transport decided to stop this effort. Next. So this electromagnetic detector was very popular then in the 60s and even until the 80s. So for example, in Australia, it started in 1955, Mr. Cartwright, he designed his own detector. So the idea was to attach sound signal to, first you have the compass. When the compass moved away from his normal north position, then there will be triggering an electric signal and then a bell. And then you could maybe go out and see there was a flying saucer outside. So this was taken as well, implemented in France. At the time they had a detector organized by a review called Flying Saucer, Lumière dans la nuit. And in 1967 they had something like 400 detectors implemented throughout France. In England as well, in the United Kingdom, they tried to set up this system. And they had something like 200 creation of 200 items. And finally, in Denmark as well, the SUFOI, that Roberto mentioned this morning, had as well an effort, and they distributed maybe 200 detectors. Of course, the problem with those little detectors, handmade detectors, they were very sensitive. And the fridge, for example, or car passing, or any other item could provoke a disturbance and alert. So there were wrong alert, and I think there was only one case where somebody allegedly saw a UFO. At the same time, there was a magnetic detection. In Australia, going to Australia, there was a case like this. Somebody in 1966 saw a UFO from close range flying, moving away from a spot where later on they realized there was some seed flattened and turning green. So it was this part, in the east part of Australia. So one researcher later on decided to set up a first camera with a weather cover protection and a detector. So when there was a change of magnetic device, then the camera will take a picture. And this is on the right side of the view from the camera. This worked apparently one time. The researcher went to the site, collected data. They sent the data to Kodak at the time, but apparently the envelope with the the pictures never arrived there. So we'll never know if there was UFO in these pictures. Now, before we go on with the field experiments organized by civilians, I feel like the need to say one word about the pioneer, because the real pioneer, who is not very well known, is Robert Beck in America. Because already in 1959 and 60, he was the first one to realize what had to be done. So he had identified a complete list of instrumentation, and he had already moving a lab with facilities inside to study and to detect UFOs. So he is a real pioneer in this sense to try to detect on a scientific basis UFOs. So then now we go forward. So in 1972, despite that the Project Blue Book closed their investigation in 1969, saying more or less that there were no UFOs, it didn't stop, as we all know, that UFOs appeared. They kept on appearing and are still appearing today. So this phenomenon is still with us. So at the time, there was a firefighter in the Yakama Indian Reservation who called Dr. Hynek and said to him, I have a problem here, and what can we do? So they decided to send David Akers, an electrical engineer, to the reserve and to do a quiet 2 weeks period on the field experimentation. So what he was doing in terms of strategy was a hit and run. He would move places, not wait at the same place. So he was going around different point of observation in a reserve and trying to see what was going on, waiting for the UFO to come to him. And of course, he made no publicity about his efforts, and nobody knew, I think he was there around. Why? Because now, after 60 years of research, we realize that behind this phenomenon there's something intelligent. So it's better not to pass the message we are on. That's what some of us believe. So what happened? He managed to get results. So he placed some instrumentation. He had some cameras with a spectrometer. He had some electronics as well. He placed, and he managed to detect by night some light phenomena that were abnormal. So unfortunately, from his position, you see in blue the places where he had set up instrumentation, and red where the phenomena were appearing. So at least it was sure that something unusual was happening and existing. So, but okay, the problem was he was 8 miles at the closer distance from the phenomena, so we don't have really the real scientific value of his pictures. And the last time I talked to him, he mentioned that the activity is still going on over there. But it's a reserve, so the access is not that easy. So next, there was another professor, Mr. Rutledge, in 1973. He decided again, because there was an increase of sightings in other area, close to his university, to go around and place with students and professors some instrumentation. So he went by night, and this resulted in his book, Project Summary, in 1981, where he claimed to have had maybe 157 sightings of UFO, which was quite big. But I like his sentence when he says, I treat reports of UFOs like bottles of medicine without labels. I can't use the medicine without the label, but I can put on the shelf until I get a label for it. So the only thing in this book, of course, all the pictures are by night. You don't discern any detail, and they didn't use any spectrum to gather more scientific-oriented data, which is a pity. Next, now I'm going to talk about Ray Stanford, who is maybe the most successful researcher, civilian researcher in obtaining evidence, as he claimed. So in 1976, he set up a project organization for physical aeroscience. He calls AAO, that means Anomalous Aerial Objects, because he's sure they are objects and not phenomena, to make a difference. So he managed to finance through 3 big donors an amount of $2.5 million, we are talking about 76, to set up facilities in an area near Austin in Texas. And he had plenty of instrumentation, including magnetometer to detect magnetic changes. He had the telescope, he had the camera, he had the laser, and he had the radar tower also. So he managed to get some results, and his main point was to try to discover a propulsion and stressing on the physics, how these objects can move and what's going on. So he has 2 big, among others, successes. One, in the night of 1978, they went to a place near Trinity site, in fact, outside the Whitefield area, where they observed the pictures by night, some 2 objects red, and he managed to film both instruments, the magnetometer and the gravimeter, which correlate the observation of the optical. And I think that's the only time in history, maybe besides the military, where there's a multi-instruments detection. More recently, something more interesting as well. In 1985, around Corpus Christi in Texas also, with other witnesses, he filmed on a Super 8 film this object, which was, he has a film of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, that is going to make available soon for the community, because these images show a beam ahead, and there's a procession of objects that move ahead with a beam in front of them. And the interesting thing is, if you compare the gimbal object from this object, then you find some correlations about the way it's moving, of course, and what he had filmed. So I'm looking forward to see this evidence released and analyzed by scientific community. So we left the military, but the military were not out of problems with the UFOs, because in fact, just in 2016, there were some documents made available about the Vietnam War. And you realize that during the Vietnam War, they had problems with UFOs, to the point they had set up some 2 projects to detect by night by radar these UFOs. And they say they are not helicopters, and they didn't find any conclusion, but still they had these 2 projects running, and the information went to a higher level, and this information, of course, is nowhere to be found. So it's very important for the community to push for information to correctly put the history of the UFO phenomena correctly in the records. Now, another maybe that you heard was happened in Brazil, where there was a problem in a small area where villagers and fishermen were attacked by lights, to the point that the mayor called the army to help. So they dispatched a team of people, and which managed as well to film, take pictures and record observation of UFOs. Some pictures are there that have been declassified. Apparently there are videos as well, but videos have never been released. Now, Jacques Vallée, that we'll hear tonight, had another approach as well. What he decided to do is to hide in a place where there had been some sightings, a camera, without telling anybody. And then every time he was going to collect if there was anything triggered to record so the camera is hidden like a normal rock, and nobody knew, and there are some examples of pictures. So I don't know if it works to hide something from the UFO phenomena. Maybe they are more clever than us, but that's what he tried to do in at the end of the 70s. So of course, Erling, I don't see Erling, but no story of field experiments can forget about the Norwegian side of it, the Project Esdalen, which is the longest active work in this area since '81, and still applicable now. and they are the best example trying to legitimize the research on this controversial topic. They got some results that we see after, and they have been very successful in establishing international cooperation with the Italians and the French, still working on it, and they publish papers like any normal scientific activity. So there are some kind of materials they are putting on the field in very remote, it's quite remote, I've been there, quite remote and quite stringent conditions or weather, very difficult, can be very harsh in the winter, and they have managed to get spectra, pictures, and radar detection of the event. Now, for Roberto, I added a slide for Italy, of course, because Italy, I was surprised to see that they're very active in, and they have different associations dealing with the recording of anomalous lights. 3 of them I know already, and the one in Polizia Veneto is very active and have been very successful in collecting pictures or data related to the lights, anomalous light. Point in Russia, of course, people are going to say, but you talk about America and Europe, but there's nothing anywhere. Well, in Russia, it was difficult to get any information before the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dismantlement of the USSR. But there's a place now nowadays in Ukraine, an association zone, who is as well interested in getting data and documenting the previous information from secret project from the Russian military. It was a SETKA project, or called after Horizon. The problem with that is we are talking about the military not giving the information, but even on the ufological side is the same thing, because the file, and, Roberto showed a picture from the KGB, some files at the time were sold to US journalists and researchers in 95, 93, and they are still not available to the ufological community for analysis. So this is, we have to push for that, I think, as well. I don't know what's the game played, but anyway. So what they did here in Ukraine, they have 2 areas. One area they try to hide artifacts in the nature where there were different sightings of UFOs. Another one they put on the roof of a building as well, a video camera, which automatically triggers when there's an increase of light or a move. And then this is transmitted to a server, and then researchers will analyze the data. Now, we started with from the USA side, so I will finish on the USA side before giving some conclusions. I'm part of the UFO data project because we trust that nothing will come from the military world. There will be no data declassified that can be analyzed by the CMV community. And we propose to create a civilian science of UFO research. So the idea is, now we are in semi-testing. With another organization called UFODAP, we have designed this station, automatic stations, and we want to create a network of stations, and that will record anomalies, put it to a server, and be made available to the researchers and SNV community for information and publication. So this is ongoing. Now, reaching the end of my conclusion, I want just to make my own conclusions and lesson learned. So, for sure, this is clear, there's a UFO, UAP mystery since a long time. And it has possibly relevance for all of us, and not only the military or other fields. So, this is very important. One thing that has been demonstrated by this project is, yes, we can study this UFO, UAP scientifically. We have managed to take pictures and other data of them, so they are real in one sense. So we can study them. So of course the problem, because it's not funded science, is not about obtaining UFO data, is the challenge as well to how we are going to find the resources, where to put them, and how to finance this instrumentation. Once we get the data, there's another big challenge appearing that people don't talk about the thing. But what are you going to do with the data? The data will be very difficult and tricky to analyze, and it has to be in the hand of very specialists, because it's not going to be like maybe normal science or normal physics. So we'll have to be ready for the unexpected. And of course, once you have the data, the question that I ask myself is, will you be is everybody ready to have it available on the table? For example, are we going to say, okay, yeah, sure, there are aliens here around us, they fly, we don't know what they want, and we don't know what they are doing, but that's life. So I don't think that's a really easy decision to take, but something food for thought. Now, so as I said, we need a big cooperation between scientists, academia, and civilians. So, in the last page, I said, so we cannot study UFOs behind the screen or at home. So it's a tough research, but we'll have to be outside on the field to study them and go where it manifests itself and try to find a way to detect and characterize it. So we have to be, as I said, at the right place at the right time. But so, of course, everybody say yes, but it's you have to repeat experiments. If you're talking, but it's not the same. It's more investigative work. If we talk about something which is intelligent behavior, whatever it is, then it's not like it's going to be repeated. You have to be more flexible and try to take this into account. We are not used to do that, of course. So, compared to the beginning of the 40s, 50s, 60s, now today we have the technology of the instrumentation, the computer, the data sharing, and the lower cost to implement a better strategy to study and detect these UFOs. So there's no excuse for us to not to do it, except the funding. And of course, now that the stigma is starting to be reduced because of the announcement of US Air Force, the US report, now I think it's the responsibility of the scientific community to engage into the topic. If in a report you have the Americans saying, yes, we have 144 cases, and we have 60 which has been detected by instrumentation, according to me, that's the responsibility of the scientific community to be curious and to want to know more. So of course the data from the military is classified, but I'm sure, like has been done already in the past, one way or the other can be found to access this data and analyze it for the benefit of all humankind, of course, and not only about the military. So thank you for your attention. I hope you like the presentation.
Excellent. Hola, 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 hola. Excellent, Philippe. Tu as le premier qui a terminé au temps. Tenemos... No, tenemos tiempo para preguntas. Así que hay alguien que quiera por allí. ¿Podemos acercar el micrófono, por favor?
Hello, Philippe. Thanks for the great presentation. I understand the need for hard, objective, quote-unquote, objective data. And I say quote-unquote because is there truly something truly objective? I mean, that goes into quantum mechanics and all that. But I understand the need for objective, hard data in the scientific community. However, I think it's fair to say that science, mainstream science, has treated reports by witnesses unfairly, and that unless they are taking hallucinogenic drugs, witnesses know what they've seen, and their testimony shouldn't be dismissed, and they should count as evidence. So, but I understand the need for objective instrumentation of and measurement.
Just a quick answer on that point. We all know the researcher, I think that out of 100%, maybe, I don't know, 95, 96, 97, 90%, the vast majority is related to stuff that people don't understand in the sky. So I'm not surprised the scientific community doesn't respond, because they see only this kind of stuff. And moreover, the biggest problem I think is the association between UFOs and aliens, little green men. As long as we associate the two, there won't be any, it's very difficult to talk about the subject. Finally, I fully agree with you that the witnesses have to be respected, regardless of if they were mistaken, and should be taken seriously, because maybe at the end, there's always a possibility to learn something about their sightings. Thank you.
¿Alguna pregunta más? Roberto.
Considerazione. La considerazione è che we need, I speak English.
Yes, please.
We need the field work, absolutely, because up to this moment, what we missed is the field work. But what is important is not to dismiss the witnesses, because today there is a very big danger from science, or the so-called science. That is the consideration that there are some sciences which can be considered science, and some other sciences which could not be considered science. For instance, humanistic matters are not considered more than from this point of view in academics. And this is wrong, because consider that the witness is extremely important. Consider that today a person can be sent to a death penalty because of a witness. So our culture is based on the witnesses, and we can't dismiss this. But of course we need this, all this, because it's a complementary aspect we should improve at all. So let me congratulate with Philippe, because he did a splendid work, and it's the evidence of what we should do in the future. Thank you.
Bravo, Pinot.
Thank you.
Va, una última pregunta. The last question. No. Pues muchísimas gracias, Philippe.
No, that's good. Thank you.
Me he cargado la S. La S. Eso pasa por el cable. No puedo, no llego.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Un fuerte aplauso para Philippe Ailleris.
Thanks.